This morning we're going to be reading from Ruth chapter 1, verses 6 to 22. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she was with her two daughters-in-law, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Go, return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband this night and should bear sons, would you therefore wait till they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. And she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you." And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. So the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said, "Is this Naomi?" She said to them, "Do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi, when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab. And they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest. May God add his richest blessing to the reading of his word.
All right, here we are, week 2 of Advent, and what a story. I love this story. And let's begin with a guy named Thomas Wolfe. Thomas Wolfe wrote a book, not to be mistaken with another author, Tom Wolfe. Thomas Wolfe wrote a book called "You Can't Go Home Again." The phrase has become much more famous than his book, I'm afraid. But in it tells a story of a man named George Weber, who's a writer. And George Weber writes a book about his family in his hometown. And after it becomes very successful, he goes home again and realizes everybody in his town hates him, because he spoke less than flatteringly about his townspeople and his neighbors. And so he leaves in search of a new home. And so he goes and he tries to settle in other cities like New York and Paris and Berlin, and he can't get home. And eventually, this is what he concludes. But why had he always felt so strongly the magnetic pull of home? Why had he thought so much about it and remembered it with such blazing accuracy if it did not matter, and if this little town and the immortal hills around it was not the only home he had on earth? He did not know. All that he knew was that the years flow by like water, and that one day men come home again. And home sticks in the blood. All of us have an idea of home. All of us, and even if you haven't come from a happy home, some people have had miserable homes when they were young. But either way, that sense of home is in us. And we desperately seek to recreate home, either to recreate it for our children when we've had a good home, or to create the home we didn't have. And Christmas is a key time of homecoming for most secular community. even Christians, anyone celebrating Christmas, it's a time of homecoming. You come home, you gather around with family and friends, and if you've had a good past, a good home, then you try to recreate those Christmases and those traditions with your kids. And if you have had miserable times, then you try to create good traditions in home for your children now. And so home, this idea of home is just ringing in the heads of people. We seem to be earmarked for home. We're going to talk a lot about that today. And so Naomi is doing just that. She's coming home here. And the writer wants you to know that with no uncertain terms, because in these short 17 verses, 12 different times the word shuv, which means return, shows up. And so what we're being told, listen, if Moab was her home, he wouldn't speak of her returning to Bethlehem. The fact that she left home and now is returning is something we're meant to see. She probably shouldn't have gone away. But we're going to talk more about why and how that unfolds. And now she's finally coming back. And why is she coming home? You'd be mistaken if you thought it's just pragmatism. It's not just, well, now there's food, and now I have nothing, and I have a better chance of survival at home than I do on the road in Moab. That's part of it, but it's not all of it, not even maybe the driving force behind it. And so we're going to talk about that, coming home, this idea of homecoming, of homesickness, of all these things that we have as humans as well. And so we're going to learn quite a bit about Naomi, about Ruth, about ourselves, and God, of course. And we're going to talk about these three things. The instinct we have for home, the result of leaving home, and then the peace of returning. And that's what we're going to see here. So let's start with the instinct for home. So what are instincts? Instincts are the inherent, unlearned inclinations of creatures towards particular behaviors. It's a big word. It's the stuff you do without thinking about it. It's the most natural thing in the world, and we see it in the animal kingdom much more clearly. So, for instance, birds will create nests without its instinct. They don't, you're a brand new bird, you grow up and you have an egg, and you just know you got to build a nest. You do it. Geese seem to know, and many birds, just to fly south when it gets cold. They just do it. Monarch butterflies do it for thousands and thousands of kilometers every year. And then my favorite is the lemur. I'll tell you why, because these are such typical men, and I love it. So when lemur males, when they have a conflict, they don't have a fist fight usually. What they do is they have something called a stink fight. And so they have glands and they're underneath their wrists, like around their wrists, and on their backside, and it releases a terrible smell. And so what they do when they have a problem is they get up and they put their hands out and they stinkify each other. And the one who runs away first is the loser. So the one who can't take the smell runs. And this is an instinct, apparently. They just know that when trouble arises, let's do this. And so these instincts come. They're natural. We all seem to have them. Every created creature seems to have instincts. And one of the instincts we have is homesickness. We long for home. And unlike every other creature, no other creature longs for home the way we do. We are so searching for home that it's not even just physical, but existential. It's spiritual, because even when you're at home, you can feel like you're not at home. We tend to naturally feel as humans as aliens in the world. Everybody feels that at some point in their lives, some more than others. It's such a powerful drive that we spend our whole lives trying to build a home. We want to make our way in the world, so we build, it could be a physical home, it could be a career, it could be a family, it could be a hobby. We want to feel like we belong. And this yearning for it is something we shouldn't ignore. When we look now at Naomi, Naomi wants to go home. Now, on one side, it is very practical. It's a very practical decision. She has gone away to Moab looking to be full. She felt like she was empty when she went to Moab and was hoping to get full. Doesn't work out that way for her, but she figures now there's food in Israel. So I'm going to go back because I don't have a husband. I don't have any boys who can help look after me. And so my best chance of survival is at home, where I've got family and friends, and there's customs. The Jews had customs the rest of the world didn't, that made ways for people like Naomi to have a better chance of not just surviving, but even having a decent life after she had lost everything. But even she acknowledges this is a slim chance. She's pretty cynical about her chances. She says, she's too old. I don't want to tell you how old she probably was, probably around late 40s. And she says, I'm damaged goods. At this point, no man's going to marry me. I'm not likely to have children. And so there's very little hope for her. And you're going to see in the next chapters what happened to her land that her and her husband, Elimelech, had. But at this point, she's painting a pretty grim picture and says, not only do I have very few practical options at home, though it's better than being in Moab, but she then says probably the most ominous thing when she then, in verses 13 and then 20 and 21, says, the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. Call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? So here's how she does something interesting. She has been calling God Yahweh the whole time, Lord Yahweh. Now she changes to Almighty, Shaddai in Hebrew. And why? Well, it's actually quite grim. It's because she's seeing, listen, everything is against me. God is against me. Not just God, El Shaddai, the Almighty, the one who cannot be resisted, the one who cannot be thwarted. His will be done. And he is against me. And if he is against me, who can be for me? And so this is what's interesting about this. She's going home to a God that she thinks is against her, and yet she's going. Why? Because in her, there is this instinct for home that says, no matter how grim it appears, her only hope is to be where God is. Even if he is her enemy, it's better to be there than to be apart from him. There's something in her, this homing signal, that is saying, get back home. Time and again, she does this, and they say this. And her only hope is to be where God is. And the reason is this, which I've said many times before, and it's a wonderful quote from a guy named Derek Kidner, Old Testament prof, because she realizes there is no refuge from the king, only in the king. There's no way of escaping him. Her only hope is to be near God. And so she goes back. And this restlessness that she has is something you and I all have, and we should take it very seriously. You and I do not feel at home in the world all the time. And I was just actually yesterday listening to an interview with a guy who's a musician from when I was a kid. I won't say the name, but was very popular and had achieved everything. He said by the time he was 24, he was a millionaire. By the time he was 26, he had not only played everywhere, but he had received every accolade he could have received in the world of music. And he said something interesting. It's not Christian imagery, because he's not a Christian, but he did use Norse imagery. He said, there is no Valhalla at the top of Rock Mountain. And he realized, it doesn't matter what you have. He still felt like an alien in the world. I still don't belong. I still haven't made my place. I've made the best nest I can make, and yet this isn't home. And of course, Lewis says it so well. I don't have the quote up there because I'm just going to say it off my head, but it's brilliant when Lewis says, in this world, you find satisfaction for almost every impulse. If you're thirsty, there is water. If you're hungry, there is food. If you're lonely, there is companionship. If there is boredom, there is distraction. If you then find in you a desire that cannot be fulfilled in this world, perhaps it's because you were not made for this world. And this sense of restlessness that Naomi has, that we have, all of us have, is wonderfully summed up by 1,600 years ago by Augustine, who said about God, you awaken us to delight in your praise because you made us for yourself. Our hearts are restless until they rest in you. And this is the first thing we learn. We all have an instinct that we aren't quite home. It's almost, I don't know if this is like you. When I think back to my childhood, if I, it's a strange thing. I try to follow me because this is off the cuff. If I think about it without looking too carefully, if I look at it, at my history out of the periphery of my view and just think vaguely about Christmases gone by or my parents who are both passed away, if I think about them, they're very clear. But the moment I stare at them directly, they become very vague. I can remember vaguely the feelings of Christmas. I remember vaguely the joy and all these wonderful things. I can see my mom in their horrible house coat. I can see my dad miserable at being awake too early. I can see all these wonderful things. But then the moment I look and try to remember their faces and what exactly they were wearing, it all disintegrates. And so I have this sense of something, but I don't have the actual thing. And similar with us, we don't always know what home is, but we know when we're not there. And this is the human condition. There's no question about it. And we have an instinct for home. Don't resist. Don't reject it. When you feel like you're not at home in the world, go with that feeling. Now, But we have to move to the second point, which is what happens when you leave home. Here's what's interesting about leaving home. We always leave home with the expectation that we will change. So if I go on vacation, I expect to come back different. I expect to come back refreshed, with a new perspective, with bigger debt, with more knickknacks, with a food poisoning, who knows? Like, you expect to come back differently when you go away. And it's not just vacations. If I go to work, I expect to come back with more stress and money, right? Or if I go to school, somebody goes away to school, you go away and you expect to come back with experiences and with education and opportunities before you, whatever it is. Anytime we leave the house, if I go outside to shovel, I expect to come back more tired with a clean walkway. We always expect to change when we go out. So, if this is the case, Naomi goes out and she suffers. Her expectation was, I'm empty in Bethlehem, so I'm going to go to Moab and be filled. That doesn't work out for her. Doesn't work out the way she intended. She suffers and she comes back changed. Of course, she comes back changed. I think we have to have a great degree of sympathy with Naomi, because in 5 verses, we read what happens to her. And of course, it's over a decade or more. And yet, boy, her life was hard. It was not easy. But when she comes back, we know she's changed. She goes to Bethlehem and the ladies come out. And the first thing they say is this Naomi? And that could be just, oh, wow, she's back. Or it could be, gosh, she's old. Gosh, she's changed. I mean, let's face it, anybody for after 10 years is going to be different. And this is before the age of, ointments and creams. And not just that, she has suffered. She's suffered terribly. And she comes back and it's like, look, is this even her? So she has changed and she acknowledges she has changed. We know, obviously, she has no husband, no son, no prospects. But it's not the only way. She came back bitter, very upset, very angry towards God. And she says so repeatedly. And now here's something I want a slow interjection here. Here's where, as a skeptic in me, if you don't remember, I was a skeptic for many years. And the skeptic in me says, listen, she leaves home. And God is saying, listen, it wasn't the best decision. So he then does some things. He permits some things, at very least, to occur to her while she's away from home, and so that she'll come back. Now, as a skeptic, I would say, listen, if my kids go out with friends and I think it was a bad decision, I don't want them to get hurt and then come home. I want them just to come home. I'll go get them. I wouldn't inflict suffering on them. So if the moral of the story, which I'm not sure it is, but if it was the case that she is being punished somehow for going away, I don't think that's the case, but if she was, then what's God doing? Like, what kind of a God is this? Why is he if he loves her, why make her suffer so horribly just to get her back? Why not just, put a roadblock up, wash out a bridge or something? Why this? And so to answer this question, I'm going to use, like usual, a strange approach. Let me start with not A Christmas Carol, but another Charles Dickens book called Great Expectations. There's this kid named Pip. And Pip is being raised by his sister and her poor but really wonderful husband, Joe, who's a blacksmith. And they're poor, and Pip is introduced to a beautiful young girl named Estella. And Estella is the adopted daughter of a woman named Miss Havisham, who is filthy rich. But Miss Havisham was jilted at the altar when she was young. And as a result, she has this little child, Estella, that she is raising to be beautiful and seductive to men, but to hate them. Because she wants to tear the heart out of every man the way she had her heart torn out by a man. And so Estella and Pip falls in love with Estella when they're little. And all through the book, as he grows old and he's a man, he can't shake Estella. He loves her, and yet she is always breaking his heart. It's tragic to read. Now, here is something he eventually confesses. The unqualified truth is that when I loved Estella with the love of a man, I loved her simply because I found her irresistible. Once for all, I knew my sorrow, often and often, if not always, that I loved her against reason, against promise, against peace, against hope, against happiness, against all discouragement that could be. Once for all, I loved her nonetheless because I knew it, and it had no more influence in restraining me than if I had devoutly believed her to be human perfection. So what he's saying is, I knew she was going to break my heart. I knew I would never have her, but I wanted it anyway. I couldn't help. Remember there's that old song, Peggy Lee, if you're old enough to know Peggy Lee, sang a song, I love the way you're breaking my heart. Who remembers that old song? Pip seems like a moth to a flame. I know it's bad for me, but I can't get enough of it. This is exactly what the Bible says about us. The Bible says, you and I don't like the world where we suffer, and yet you have chosen this world. And we go back to the fall. You chose, and I chose, and Adam and Eve chose a world of suffering the moment they left home and said, we can make a better home than God can. And we continue to choose that world every single time we make the decisions we make. And so here's what's interesting about this. Isn't it funny? The modern world, one of the things I hear often when I speak to people, especially skeptics, is freedom. We're free to make our own decisions, and we should be free, free, free. Even in the church, freedom, freedom, freedom. Listen, we love freedom. You know what you don't like? The freedom to suffer for your stupid decisions. And people say, well, listen, I'm happy if I suffer when I make a bad decision. If I am jaywalking and I'm struck by a car, I deserve it. But when I'm just minding my own business and I'm hit by a drunk driver, that's unfair. Hold on. You want free will for who? Just you? Or everyone? You see, if you want a world where agents are free to make decisions, you have to accept the consequences of everybody being free, even the donkey. Right? And so it's amazing. We love freedom, but not the freedom to be at pain. My friends, we cannot have both. What is wonderful about this, the redeeming, beautiful thing that the Bible alone, Christianity alone offers is this, that in grace, God allows us to choose, but he uses our choices to drive us to him. And so, Naomi, you are free with Elimelech to go seek your fortune and your survival anywhere you want. You are not free, thank the good Lord, to make a decision that will contradict what he wants to accomplish. And so C.S. Lewis again, in his book, The Problem of Pain, which you should all read, it's brilliant. And in it, he says this wonderful thing, God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. And so he takes someone like Naomi, like us, and says, of course you're free to do what you want, but I will use your poor decisions to guide you to what is better. This is what he is doing to her. And so, and think about this. People say, well, it's still not right to suffer. Hold on a second. If Naomi did not suffer, she would not have left Moab. If she didn't leave Moab, she would be without the future we know well, if you haven't read it, I'm going to spoil it. But this great future she's going to have. No suffering means she stays put. And you say, well, is that a big deal? Hold on, let's push this further. People will often say, I don't care what the goal is, what heaven is like, what the reward is like. It's not worth the suffering we see in the world, where you see insects that seem like they only exist, literally in Egypt, I think it's in the Nile, that they bore into the eyes of young people specifically, and then eat outward and make you blind. Now, what kind of a God makes this? What kind of a God does this? And he says, it can't be worth it. All the suffering in the world, even if there's only a little, isn't worth whatever is promised at the end. There's plenty of things I could say, but let me use one example. I have been in rooms with people when they find out or when they tell me that their children are going to die. Now, or have a sickness or cancer or something. Now, if you have a child that has been in that position, and then you are told by the doctor, listen, there's a cure, it's 100%. However, this cure will make them so sick, it'll take them to the edge of death. It'll be painful. They will experience pain that will probably be worse than dying, but it will save them. Which parent is going to say it's not worth it? Every one of you will say, if it means life, then the temporary suffering is worth the life. And this is where we look at Scripture and we say, I don't know why people suffer. That is certainly above my pay grade. But I do know this, that the promise of eternity is worth it. If the Bible is true and eternal life awaits and suffering is the only way this thick noggin is going to get there, batter me. Do what you want. I want to be there with him. And I know that's easier said than done, but this is what we're seeing over and over. And she comes back. Of course she comes back changed. Of course she's bitter. I don't begrudge Naomi one bit Barry Webb is a wonderful scholar. He may be retired now, I don't know. Written really well on Ruth. Says this, that Naomi is like a storm-battered ship limping into the harbor. Naomi, while still herself, is also not herself. She is not like the Naomi that went away, and she knows it. And so, suffering doesn't always make us better. Suffering can make us very bitter, as it has for Naomi. But the good news is, God has been at work in her suffering to bring her home. Now, moving to the final point, the return, the peace of returning. And, sometimes when I deal with harder topics, not harder, but I guess more complicated ones, like suffering, it's easier to use stories, so I'm going to use another one. And so, Mr. Gower from It's a Wonderful Life. So I mentioned It's a Wonderful Life last year. If you don't know this, I'm going to mention him briefly. Mr. Gower, in the movie, is a druggist, a pharmacist. And he has received news through a telegram that his son has died. And so he is weeping, he's miserable, and he's drunk. He's been drinking, and so he's in a horrible state. And while he is in this horrible state, he is putting together prescriptions for someone, and he accidentally puts poison in the pills. Now, he gets it all ready, and he hands it to George Bailey, a young George Bailey, a young version of Jimmy Stewart, and says, take this to the customer. George Bailey has seen what he's done. He has been watching. He says, I know he's put poison in these pills. So George goes out. He delivers all the other deliveries he has to make, and he comes back, but didn't make that delivery. He didn't drop off the poison pills. And Mr. Gower, when he sees him in his drunken state, is angry, and he strikes and hits George, and he's mad. And George breaks out and says, listen, I know you're hurting. I know you're upset. I know what's happened. And you didn't know what you were doing. You put poison in those pills. It's poison, I tell you, he says in the 30s accent. There's poison in them, so I didn't deliver them. And the moment Mr. Gower realizes what this child has done, he rejoices. Now, why does he rejoice? Because of this. If he had obeyed Mr. Gower would be in prison. But instead, he doesn't obey, knowing that it was better to not answer his prayer, his wish, his command. Now, think about back to Naomi. What if Naomi's prayers and her commands and her wishes towards Ruth were obeyed? What if God opened up Ruth's heart and said, Ruth, just leave her. Stay in Moab. I'm going to bless you anyway. Let Naomi go. Let her go. She's being miserable. She's being too clouded by her suffering. Let her go. If God had answered Naomi's prayer at the moment it was uttered and in the way it was uttered, Naomi would have suffered much, much worse. And so, what is God doing? Here's what we're seeing. Naomi prays out of her anguish, but God answers out of his wisdom. This is what you and I do all the time. If I became the person that I wanted to be when I was, when I was 22, I was very clearly being earmarked for a very different life. A very different life in academia. I had a path clearly made for me. I, of course, then met a girl who told me about Jesus, and now here I am. But I know you're all like, she's the problem. She's the one who is. But listen, I was fortunate enough to have a Jimmy Stewart, a Ebenezer Scrooge moment. Years later, while traveling for work, I was in Ottawa, and I came across a young lady I knew at university in my more academic and not Christian days, and she was now married to one of our English professors. Don't worry about that. And so, hope she's not listening to this. So I see her outside. She's like, you should come for dinner. We're going to take you for dinner. So I go for dinner with her and her husband. And in that dinner, I am able to see what my life would have been like. I'm able to see that if I had stayed where I was, I would have had a life of loneliness, a life of thinking that I was much cleverer than I am. I would have had a life of sitting in offices, all these things. And I saw the self-absorption. I'm not knocking them. They're wonderful people. But the self-absorption that my life is only as big as my work. And I remember thinking, thank you that you saved me from that. Thank you that you did not answer my prayer the way I prayed it. What I prayed at the time was, Lord, I want a life that's happy at home, and I want to be able to teach and love people. That's what I want to do. I want to teach people. I didn't know he was going to do this. But if he had answered my prayer the way I uttered it, I would have been done for. Instead, he answered the prayer the way I would have prayed it if I knew what to pray for. And this is what we should be looking at here, the grace of what he is doing here to Naomi, of showing her. all of this, now of bringing her home. And now we look back, of course. She doesn't see it. She's heartbroken. She can't see the truth. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty, she says in verse 21. You know, it's hard to, if I'm Ruth, I'm sitting in the background like, hey, I'm here. You know, you're not entirely empty. I'm with you. Remember? And so she is so blinded by her suffering, she can't see that as Ruth clings to her, that is God clinging to her. If Ruth had obeyed, then she would have been much more miserable. If God had answered that prayer, Naomi's future would have been much more bleak. And so we ask now, why is Ruth clinging to her at all? Because Ruth makes the very counterintuitive decision to go to Israel as a Moabite. I've spoken about the history of these two countries. They weren't great. To go, she is basically signing on the dotted line, saying, I'm accepting, for Naomi's sake, a life of poverty, a life of marginalization, of rejection, and of loneliness. I'm going to take it all. Now, why does she do this? I don't know everything. I'm not in Ruth's heart, but I do know this. Ruth understands that if she keeps her life, Naomi loses hers. If Ruth keeps her life in Moab and her prospects open, Naomi is done for. And so, for some reason, Ruth decides, no, I am going to lay down my life. I'm happy to forsake the future I have for Naomi's future. Listen, it's Christmas. We're all very generous, and we think we're very kind when we give to charities and we up our giving to the church, and that's good. We should be generous. But what I do fall short of is I'm happy to help you in your suffering, but I'm not prepared to exchange my peace for your suffering. Right? I fall short of giving you that. You know, we're always happy to give some money to the poor, but are you willing to exchange places with the poor and become poor so that they can become rich? Now you're asking too much, Jesus, right? That's too much. And yet, why does she do this? She knows she does this well because Jesus did it. That's what Christmas is. Christmas is Jesus leaving us perfect peace, his perfect home, his comfort, everything he has, not at the risk of his life. Like Ruth is noble. She's doing this at the risk of her life. Jesus comes not the risk of his life, but at the cost of it, knowing it's going to kill him. He came and he became poor so you could become rich. He came becoming sin so that you could become righteous. Athanasius, this wonderful old desert father, 373 BC he died, or AD he died, says this wonderful thing. He has been manifested in a human body for this reason only, out of the love and goodness of his Father for the salvation of us men. He became what we are so that he might make us what he is. This is what Christ did. And so if you're a Christian, rejoice. It's actually Philippians 4:4. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say, rejoice. And if you need a reason to rejoice, I don't know if we're going to sing it or not. I think we're going to sing Noel. Yeah, we're going to sing first Noel. I don't know if we're going to sing this part, though. And there's this is why you should sing if you're a Christian. Then let us all with one accord sing praises to our heavenly Lord, that hath made heaven and earth of naught, and with his blood mankind hath bought. You have been redeemed despite your poor decisions. That's the God we serve. We should be singing. That's the reason we rejoice. If you're a skeptic, here's what I'll say. Jesus knew that keeping his life would mean you losing yours. He bore our griefs, carried our sorrows, was pierced for your transgressions, was crushed for your iniquities, and his wounds have brought us peace. And so Rebecca McLaughlin, wonderful writer, says, he bears the moral weight of guilt and sin in our place, but he also bears the heartbreak of our suffering. Jesus holds us close as we lament. He weeps with us as we weep. He knows the end of the story when he will wipe every tear from our eyes, but this doesn't stop him from cleaving to us in our pain. In fact, pain is a place of special intimacy with him. When you suffer, you're not any better, but you do behave just like Christ. And as a result, you can meet Christ in your suffering. The suffering is actually the point of intimacy with God, when he is most near, when you most are like him because he suffered when he didn't have to. And so he is near. So if you're a skeptic, turn to this God. He sees your need and he met your need and he is waiting. Repent and believe. It is Christmas. Let's pray. Father, thank you. Thank you for Ruth. Thank you for Naomi. Lord, thank you for these raw accounts of humans who suffer and struggle. Lord, thank you that you knew that if you came to earth and kept your life. The devil, in the wilderness, that was the goal, wasn't it? The goal of the enemy seems to have been to try to get you to keep your life. Everything was to try to keep you from dying, it seemed, and to exert your power rather than lay it down. And yet you came and you laid it all down, Father. You bore things that you did not deserve for our sake, Father, and we thank you for it. We thank you for that. That is what what the incarnation, that's what Christmas is pointing to. This is why we anticipate. We think, boy, if we can have such peace, such joy, such happiness, and being so content in this world where we taste but a stream of your goodness, what will it be like, Lord, when you return and we taste it in full? God, and so we rejoice and we look forward to it. We anticipate your second coming. And for those who don't know you, Father, I pray that by your Spirit you've been working on them and that they hear about this home that you're bringing people to. And I pray that you would stir their hearts to want to go home with you, Father, and they can do that even now, Lord. Thank you for all that you do for us. And we ask this in Jesus' good name. Amen. And friends,